Merry Christmas, unless you're Jewish, in which case that's insensitive, and I'm sorry. So as a Christmas present for everybody, I'm going to be making this video on how to write a mystery. Now, obviously, if you're watching a video like this, then you're already involved in writing in some shape or form. However, most of the YouTube videos, online articles, or heavens, even actual books are a lot more broad. This is a little bit more niche when it comes down to a specific genre. These are tips and tricks that you can use when specifically writing a mystery. And a mystery is, like Sherlock Holmes, or Benedict Cumberbatch, or Robert Downey Jr., or, other detectives. So, I can break down how to write a good story, but that's been done a million times. This is how you write a good mystery. The beginning of any good story, you're going to be introducing something called characters. And if you've passed 7th grade English, then you should know what those are. So, any good story establishes main characters, and mainly a protagonist. And again, for those 7th grade graduates, a protagonist is your main character. He's your hero, or she. Women can be protagonists too. I'm so sorry. So your protagonist, he or she, your protagonist is a vital part of the story, and the same goes for mysteries. So very early on in your mystery, it would be very wise to introduce your protagonist. And another key character that you would need to introduce early on in the story is the victim. Your victim is the person or people that are affected by the crime. And since this is a mystery, I'm assuming that there's some sort of crime. Otherwise, what are you trying to solve? It's a mystery. That's the mystery. So you want to introduce these two characters very early on, and there's a reason why. You want to introduce your protagonist early and your victim early so that your audience, whether it be the ones reading the story or the ones watching the movie or TV show or whatever you guys are up to, you want to give them time to grow with these characters. They need to have a bond with these characters. Otherwise, why should we care that the mystery gets solved? Who cares about a protagonist solving a mystery if we don't care about the protagonist? And why should we care that the mystery even gets solved if we don't care about the victims? After your key characters have been established, it's time for the fun part, the call to action. The call to action, if you pass 7th grade English, you know, is the exciting incident that causes your protagonist to jump into action, to solve the mystery. Now, your call to action can be a lot of different things. It varies by the story, which makes your story unique and keeps it from being all the same. Now, I don't want to get too nerdy for you guys, but the call to action is directly from something which is called the hero's journey. The hero's journey, which there's a link in the description below for an awesome video that describes the hero's journey in a lot more detail than I'm willing to go. Mostly because I, too, learned it from that video. But back to our 7th grade English educations, you might remember something called the triangle thingy. You know what I'm talking about. Like, it starts off with this is your beginning, and then you have your rising action, and then the climax, and then the falling action, and then the resolution. It's the same thing, just broken down into a very complicated circle, and most movies and stories follow the circle. The link's in the description below. But back to the call to action. The call to action causes your protagonist to jump into the story. Now, you can do this simply by having the victim ask the protagonist for help, or you can get more creative with it, which I would highly recommend considering it's a story. Whatever you decide your call to action to be, make sure it's believable. Why should the protagonist want to help? What does the protagonist get from helping solve this mystery? Maybe the protagonist is a detective, and it's his job, and he gets literal compensation for helping solve the mystery. Perhaps the victim is a friend of the protagonist, and the personal satisfaction of helping a friend is why he wants to do it. As long as the audience understands why the protagonist wants to help the victim, you've got a good call to action. After your call to action, you begin the second act of your story. This is the body of the story. This is where everything gets juicy. I don't like how I said juicy. So the second act, this is where you're going to introduce your first clue. The classic footprint in the sand that tells the protagonist what direction to go. And once they know which direction to go, they're going to follow a chain of events, this big spider web of things, into the mystery. And one of the most important parts, once you start following this chain of events from your first clue, is introducing suspects. A suspect is obviously someone who could quite possibly have caused the mystery, or persons. Like I said, it varies story to story. But there are some very important tips and tricks or guidelines that you can use when introducing suspects. One thing that a lot of mysteries and popular movies get wrong is you need to introduce who actually did the crime pretty early on in the suspect part. A lot of really famous movies ruin the endings because they do the big reveal, like in Scooby-Doo. Imagine watching a Scooby-Doo episode, they take the mask off, and no one has any clue who the guy is. So you want to introduce who did it in the whodunit. Duh. No one likes the idea of the rug just being swept out from under them. Like, oh, it was an evil twin the whole time that we didn't introduce whatsoever. Side note, only one movie has pulled off the evil twin thing, and it's called, spoilers, The Prestige, and he did it so well. Christopher Nolan, genius. Anyway, you want to introduce who did it when you introduce your other suspects. But to help disguise who did it, you're going to introduce other suspects, which are called red herrings. Now, these red herrings are characters who could have done it, and the audience could believe that they did it, but they didn't do it. Red herrings help distract the audience from who actually did it. Because here's the thing about mysteries that a lot of people don't understand. The audience wants to solve the mystery. Now, obviously, we don't want them to solve the mystery. If the audience guesses it too early on, they're not even going to care about the ending because it was too easy to see coming. But you have to give them a fighting chance because half of the fun of watching a mystery is trying to figure out who did it. So when you're introducing your red herrings into the story, make sure you give the audience valid reasons to suspect them. But also make sure that you have very logical explanations on how they didn't do it. Because if you make it blatantly obvious that this one suspect is guilty and then just kind of be like, psych, he didn't do it, the audience feels cheated and it's almost as bad as the whole evil twin brother thing. After the body of the mystery is the most satisfying part of any mystery. The ending. The ending of a mystery has so much pressure on it to be everything that the audience has expected the whole story. Especially if it's a movie and they've been sitting there for 2 hours wondering on the edge of their seat who did it. And when you're designing your ending, you need to keep in mind that the audience has also been playing part of the detective the whole time. It's not just your protagonist trying to solve the crime. The audience has been keeping up with clues, suspects. They want to be a part of the story. Now, here's a few tips when it comes to creating your ending. Obviously, it's going to be different with every story because if all the stories were the same, they'd be boring. 1, don't pull a fast one over your audience. We've talked about this with the evil twin brother thing, but there's other elements that can go into this step. You need to make sure that your ending was actually possible. You don't want to make it to where the maid did it, but the maid was with the detective the whole time. You have to make sure you leave gaps of time to where it would be believable that this person did it. And for the love of God, if you're going to make the protagonist be the villain after all, which happens more than you would think, make it believable and build it up throughout the story. One thing that Now You See Me did terribly is building up the big twist ending, which, spoilers, I probably should have done that before. Anyway, the good guy was the bad guy the whole time, but the bad guy was really the good guy. It's a complicated situation. Watch the movie, though. It's a great movie. It's just they could have done a better job of giving you little Easter eggs to help you suspect it. Like I said, you don't want to pull the rug out from anyone. You want to give them reason to believe it. After solving the mystery, don't abruptly end the story. You still have these characters that you've developed through this entire process that the audience should be latched on and attached to. You need to have a good resolution to help your audience ease out of the story. Not just, boom, that's who did it. See you guys next week. That sucks. You want your audience to leave the book, the theater, the episode on Netflix feeling satisfied and a feeling of resolve. But like I said, this was a very broad overview of how to write a mystery with a few tips and tricks that could help you if you're feeling stuck. It also makes me feel nice because when I wrote this, it made me feel a lot smarter than I actually am. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk about mysteries.